a Heroes Welcome podcast.
Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us this morning on a Heroes Welcome podcast, your ultimate guide to understanding the incredible world of mental health. I'm Maria Laquerre-Diego, licensed marriage and family therapist, registered play therapist supervisor, and I'm here today with my co-host.
And that's me, Liliana Baylon, also licensed marriage and family therapist and registered play therapist.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah. So, Maria, what is it that it's just going to be you and me? So, listeners,
It's just us. Buckle up.
And as we are preparing for the keynote that we're doing with Marshall Lyles next week, we thought it would be a good idea for the two of us to come in and talk about dynamic disability. So one, because we're advocating for it. Two, because not a lot of our colleagues actually know about it. Actually, not even a lot of doctors know about it.
Yes.
So we want to do a little bit of an intro to follow up with the important conversation that we will have next week with a lot of you. So how would you define, Maria, how would you explain briefly what dynamic disability is?
Yeah, sure. So when I say dynamic disability, this is one of those words that we kind of learned together.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, dynamic disability means, anything that is going on that impacts someone's day-to-day functioning that may not be visible, right? So like invisible illness is like another kind of term that people throw around.
Yeah.
Although not all disabilities are illness-based. So I think that's why dynamic disability is a nice broad term.
Yeah.
But it is situations and things happening internally that may not have an external like indicator that there is a disability.
There you go. Thank you. So the way that I've been explaining in a social context, because I go out sometimes as an introvert, it's really hard to go out. But then when I go out and I have to explain about my dynamic disability, I explain it as it's something that fluctuates. It tends to fluctuate throughout the day. It may be that I'm good in the morning, but then the afternoon I'm not. It may be that I'm right now okay at this morning, and then within an hour something switches. So it's either the flare, the pain, the energy that just fluctuates for me, and then it's just not predictable. Period. It doesn't matter what it is, but then when they come up, then it just dictates how the rest of the day is gonna go, and how many pivots I have to make because of it. So something that Maria and I want to talk to you about it is that we're finding out that a lot of people do not know about it, because when we think about disabilities, we think about something that we see, right?
Yep.
So if we see someone struggling to walk in a wheelchair, if it's other kinds of disabilities, something that you see, you're able to say like, oh, okay. But with Maria and I, they don't see it. And they see us smiling all the time.
And doing all the things.
And doing all the things, right? That's the feedback that we get. But we just saw this video, or we just saw you there. You were fine. And the reality is that we now spend a lot of our time explaining, right? So what else will you add in that part? Because I'm assuming you're also, right? We were just talking before the podcast.
Yes.
That I have to keep explaining that pretty much on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what else will you include there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so we have, when you think of disabilities, right, and you brought up like a wheelchair, like those are like static, right? Like that's going to be that case for a while. And there's a visible reminder for anybody else on the outside. And with a dynamic disability, it can be day to day, it can be hour to hour. And I know at least in our individual cases, there isn't an identified trigger. So it's not that we can't avoid, if you just don't do this, then you'll be fine. That's not the case, right? A lot of these conditions that qualify under a dynamic disability, there isn't a specific trigger, or we didn't do something that then we're having to pay the cost, so to speak.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can look at. I've been telling a lot of people, is like, remember social media, like the rule around social media, that we only see like the best of the lives behind. We don't really see all the pieces behind the screen.
Yeah.
That is life with a dynamic disability, right? Yes, it looks like I am doing all of the things and I have all of the energy and I'm enjoying every moment, and I really try to. But sometimes, giving my all for a talk, a podcast, a presentation, hanging out with friends, trying to do a date night with my husband, I then have to plan for a recovery time.
Yeah.
Right. That I don't post on social media, that people are not privy to all of the time, right? Like some of my closest circle will be potentially, or my office might, if now I'm going to be working from home, so that I can really recover. And so part of it is yes. And this is an ongoing conversation, because there is this perception of what's on social media is reality. And living with a dynamic disability is you see just the highlights for sure. And sometimes the highlights seem to be frequent. And that doesn't take into account all of the recovery time, all of the downtime, and the preparation beforehand to do that event. Right. I know you and I are going to be traveling with lots of things to make sure that we are our best selves when we're in Virginia. And we are both going to be coming home and having to recover from this event.
Which again is something that the hope of us talking not only to you about dynamic disability and introducing you to it, but also even to share, this is what it takes for both of us to do this. And right before we were talking about okay, so what are we taking in our luggage to be okay? Which for me, even though I don't have asthma, includes now traveling with the oxygen portable machine. Right. So you will not see it. You will not know that I need it. You will not know that I have to notify the airline that I have to travel with it. You will not know that it will force me to sit in a certain seat because I have a disability. You will not know that because either if I have anxiety or depression or celiac disease or thyroid disease, that I actually, because of those things, I also deal with dynamic disability, because those things you don't get to see, right? You may think I'm a picky eater because I will not eat certain things, but do not know that if I eat those things just so that I can be with you, or because they're limited choices, then I'm gonna end up puking. Or it is just a bad reaction that I have to it. Right. So, and I mentioned those because those are the most common that we tend to talk about when we have dynamic disability. There are mental health disorders, endocrinology, respiratory, which a lot of people do not know that when they have asthma, that is not only a disability, but also a dynamic disability, because it hits you and then you're out.
It fluctuates. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I like the term because it is such a big, broad umbrella. It's not specific to mental health or specific to respiratory or, in my case, autoimmune, right? It covers a wide variety. And the link is usually it's kind of invisible. There's not an outward sign. And two, it fluctuates, right? Its presence and its impact on you and its intensity all fluctuates. And I today we're going to kind of talk about what are the accommodations you've had to learn to make for yourself as a professional with a dynamic disability. We giggled beforehand, but I introduced you to traveling with a heating pad at all times. There's just one sitting in my empty suitcase right now. That is my travel heating pad. Yeah. And for you, that was such a moment when I was like, oh, I have that. And I like whipped it out of my suitcase.
So for all of you who are listening, Maria and I and two other play therapists, we tend to do now a working retreat. And going to that working retreat where it's like, okay, so what do you have in your bag? What do you have in your bag that I can use? And we went from oils to the heating pad to even like nurturing ourselves in a different way, because we started sharing what is it that you deal with? What are accommodations that we have to make because of this? So Maria and I tend to go to places now thinking, what accommodations can I make for you? And what are the accommodations that I have to share with you?
Right.
So as a clinician, if you're not aware of this, you will not know what kind of accommodations that you have to make for your clients, right? And we may tend to dismiss it in this medical model, which is mental health, such as, are you lazy?
Right.
Are you just canceling just because you don't want to work? Are you being resistant? So is that struggle that we don't tend to see? We tend to minimize. Maria and I tend to share stories now. All of you, buckle up. But we tend to share stories now every time that we have to go to urgent care or emergency services of how many times we get dismissed, which is, oh, it's just a panic attack, or it's just an anxiety. And we're like, no, it's not. So if I wasn't a mental health therapist, if we were not mental health therapists, how do we advocate for it? Right. So our clients tend to go through this, especially if they're minors, if they're kids, they tend to get dismissed quite often.
Yes.
Because they're not being understood, and because there's no straight link in regards to what it is in order to help you with it. They tend to believe that you're making things up.
Yes. Yeah. And if you can't easily fit into the box that they want to just check off and send you on your merry way, it does feel extra taxing, right? Yeah, my last visit to the emergency room, thankful to have my spouse with me. But yeah, the doctor came in and was like, oh, you have a history of anxiety. I think this is a panic attack. And I was in physical pain that had me doubled over and shaking.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, and right. Of course, I have anxiety. I am in terrible pain. I'm in a very traumatic situation and place. I knew to expect to be dismissed as a woman and in pain. So of course I'm anxious, and I'm in terrible physical pain.
Yeah.
Both of those things are true at the same time.
Yeah, which for a lot of times, either doctors or therapists, they cannot conceive that idea that we can have both. And I love even our conversation with Marshall in the last episode where he said, yeah, but what if the anxiety and depression is actually there for a reason? Which I'm like, totally. It's my nervous system telling me and telling you something's not okay.
It's the appropriate response for the situation. That has been my favorite tagline from Marshall. And I am like all the time now, just kind of playing it out there. Like, of course I am. And that is a healthy response to what I am experiencing right now. We are not going to minimize or dismiss or blow past this.
Yeah.
It is my body telling me that there is something not okay. But yeah, I think, this, even just for us, this has been like a new kind of conversation for us and a new consideration in terms of like, how do we accommodate, our clients, but also how do we accommodate ourselves?
Yes.
I wonder how many of our listeners are sitting there going, I wonder if what I am struggling with or what I am experiencing could be considered a dynamic disability. I know my own story is that this was downplayed and minimized most of my life, right? And so it hasn't been until I was able to connect with other people who validated what I was going through and helped give names to what I was going through and kind of giving me permission to take care of myself.
Yeah.
In whatever way that needed to be so that I could be the best professional.
Beautiful. Right. So then we go back to, so what do we do and how do we advocate for all of you who are listening? If you know someone or if you're going through this, because when we go to trainings, we don't talk about this piece in the cultural piece, right? When we're regulated by associations that tell us how to do play therapy or how to do mental health, they're actually excluding us from that. And then there's a shame that comes over because as a play therapist or as a mental health therapist, I should be doing these things this way. There's no accommodations for it, or there's a shame or guilt because are you abandoning your clients? How dare you not to show up? You suck it up and push through, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, even being able to acknowledge that, as a as an aging play therapist, whether my body was going to be, working the way I wanted it to or not my whole life, like up and down off the floor is very difficult for me some days. Some days I can handle it fairly well. Other days I'm not getting back up without help. And that should not be my client's experience.
Yeah.
But does that mean I can't be a play therapist? Like, no, no. And I need to give permission to myself, to my colleagues, but also to my clients and the parents, right? When we tell parents all the time, like, you need to start playing with your kid, like, get on the floor and play. I don't know how many times I hear in presentations and like reports about play therapies, like, get on the floor and play with the kids. It's like,
and
what if I could? What if I could? And the play that I do not on the floor is just as valuable.
Yes.
Just as important.
Yes. And for me, from a culture perspective, from ethnicity and race, I keep thinking, and when you tell me to tell parents to get on the floor and play, is that culturally appropriate? Is that something that they do? Which I got dismissed so many times for raising that question, but I was like, no, it's a valid question. Actually, not all cultures go to the floor and play. Why do I have to shame you for not doing that? And why am I projecting for you to do that? As a matter of fact, why are you projecting so that I can do that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Play. And we know, right? Play is universal. It looks different. And it is all valid and effective.
Yes.
All valid and effective. Like, we are not saying here one type of play is better than the other.
No.
And so, yeah, I think there is a lot of, it's hard having a dynamic disability to begin with, right? Just as an individual human being with a dynamic disability, there's a lot of feelings that come along with that in terms of our own internal struggles, feelings of shame or guilt or less than, right? We can be really, really difficult on ourselves. And that at times is really supported by the medical model, right? Like, are you just like amping this up? Are you just being histrionic? Are you just being a hysterical woman? Cut it out. Right. So like some of that gets reinforced, and being a professional in a helping field with a dynamic disability, I think increases that level of, internal spiraling that can happen. Like, am I not effective? What happens if it's a bad day and I have to reschedule and pivot my clients and my schedule for the day? Like, does that make me a bad clinician? No. Does that make me a bad professional? Does that make the work that I'm doing invalid now because I've had to say no, not today?
Yeah. So the answer to all of those questions, it's no. But how do we talk to more therapists, and how do we even have conversations with regulatory associations to say, hey, do you have continue with the model, just thinking of able bodies? Because we know that if we get sick, ethically, they're telling us, go away. It's like the aging part. You're old, go away. So that's a form of discrimination towards us, telling us, oh, you're sick. You should not be actually doing therapy. You need to retire. Or as presenters, like, are you sure we can do this?
Right. And there's almost this lack of like, if I can't count on you, right? And it's like, well, it's not that you can't count on me. I can't count on my own body some days. Like, that is not a me thing.
Yeah.
But it very much translates into a me thing.
Yeah. Right? Which now, even for me, and again, Maria and I were having this conversation. So now where we're presenting, we're like, okay, if the plan is for me to be in person and my body says, Nene, you're not going to do that today, is there an option for me to show up virtually?
Right.
If we cannot do it virtually, are you okay if, we reschedule? Like, what can we do? Can you also open your horizon and make accommodations, letting people know that there is accommodations that we have to make the same way that we should make it for everyone else?
For everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We, when you think of let's think of like a day-long training that you're going to go attend, right? Like you start at 9, you get a 15-minute break, you get an hour for lunch, another 15-minute break, and then, and then you have spent 6 hours sitting, learning, trying to take all this information in. What if, as an attendee or as a presenter, you need different, right? Maybe you need more breaks with less time.
Yeah.
Maybe you need different seating capabilities and accommodations. Right? I know we see a lot more of that in terms of like ADHD and neurodivergent needs, right? Like there's lots of fidgets and candies now when you go to training, sometimes like across the tables. I know myself, especially when we do online trainings, I'm like, please take care of yourself. That means you need to like step back from the camera and stand up and move around, like do that. So I think we're seeing that in some areas, in terms of dynamic disabilities. And then in other areas, there's still so much more we've got to do. There's so much more we've got to do, right? Sitting in a chair for 6 hours, some days that's all my body wants is to just sit and not move at all. And other days it's like, 20 minutes of this, and my body is telling me I need to either move or I'm going to need to lay down. And I am less effective when I am laying down.
I love that you said that. Recently, I had another emergency surgery, and sitting down was not an option.
Right?
I needed to lie down. So I'm like, if you need to talk to me, if we need to have meetings, I will show up for you. Just know that I'm going to be lying down with a heating pad. The camera's going to be off. I will see you, but just know this, right? So can we start thinking about not in an able body, but can we start being open in regards to there's more than, right? And again, our hope is that if you can go to Virginia, if you're one of the few who are going to go to Virginia, yay for you, you're going to get more of this. But if not, how can we help you learn more about this? Because there's no trainings right now about it. So just so you know, Maria, Marshall, and I, we're talking about it. But it's, how can we do more trainings? How can we advocate for agencies, for associations to start thinking about us too? We matter too, not as clinicians only, but also as clients going through this. And then what can we do in order to help you with those misunderstandings, those labels that add to our shame and guilt, either because you're the clinician or the client? What can we do to remove those mental health barriers when we don't understand what is happening? And then what do we do in regards to social integration? What are the accommodations? What is it that we can do in order to this? And fair, the conversation that we're having with Marshall, right, is if you see it, you're like, oh, and then you don't see it and you forget about it. And Maria and I were like, well, we're not going to let you forget about it. We're going to talk to you about it. How about that?
We're learning to be real loud about it. But we also acknowledge too, like we come, Liliana, you and I come from a place of privilege that we, are in private practice or have the ability to, reduce our caseload, switch what we're doing, be in charge of our schedule, and many of our listeners may be at an agency setting where they do not have those options and flexibility. And that is a whole nother conversation, right? Like, how do you advocate for yourself? Part of that is how do you be honest with yourself about what you need? And getting really okay with saying these are the things I need and not seeing them as a luxury, but a necessity, right? Like I have a heating pad that I travel with. That is a necessity. That is not a luxury.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to change my office around, and it's like, I need a chair that I can sit in. Yeah. And it, and it cannot be an $80 Target chair, as cute as they are.
Yeah.
I need something that my body will not reject and cause more issues and harm, right? That's a necessity, not a luxury. And it's a privilege to be in that position, right? When I was working in
clinician,
that was not an option.
Yeah, I love that. As a clinician, that may be a privilege. Also, as a clinician, what is it that you know about your clients in order for you? And is that a privilege if you have access to provide that for your clients or not? There was a prior podcast that Lisa, Diane, and Marshall did, but they were talking about, are you considering your playroom?
Yeah.
Right. And I love how Marshall so humbly started talking about the playroom setting. Like, what is it that you're thinking about? So even as Maria is talking about, like, what kind of share do I need in order for me to produce, in order for
Mhm.
me to do? For clients, it's what is it that we can have? And can we not minimize or shame clinicians for doing that because of the perception of linkage or whatever it is that we may doing because it's not accepted in the traditional model of play therapy or mental health, right?
Yeah. And extending these accommodations, right? I would say that most of us now know and make accommodations for kids,
Yeah.
right? With sensory needs, with neurodiversity needs. Like I think we're all on board,
Yeah.
right? That. And what steps do we need to take to have those same accommodations and accessibility for adults with
Yes.
these same needs?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we had the incredible Amy Nelson here in Massachusetts for our keynote last year for SIT, talking about sensory and seeing a room of 100 adults playing with like the body socks
Yeah.
and like the resistance bands, right? Like we also need these things.
Yeah.
It doesn't just stop. And like, how do we not just have them to offer them, but reduce the shame and the guilt for being an adult
And
with
needing it.
different needs?
Yeah. So I guess in summary, what we're saying is let's learn together more about dynamic disability. If you don't know if you have questions, reach out to any of us. We'll be more than happy to share. It should not just be up to Marshall to talk about this. But do reach out for consultation with Marshall. But reach
Yes.
out and ask. And our hope is that everyone who's listening share this episode with others because we all have to learn in community. Let's also advocate for associations to stop shaming us and thinking just about able body doing the what we do. Most of us who have disabilities have an incredible capacity for empathy as well. We start thinking differently because of it. But also do not add to the resilience that we have to go through in order to do our work. So please do not minimize. Please do not gaslight.
Mhm.
Do not make decision for us. Let me have autonomy on it. And
Yes.
do not make assumptions just because you see something on social media.
Yes. Remember the dark side of all of those. But seriously, yes, we are also still straddling the how do we do this
Yeah.
ourselves? And I think our invitation is like, you are not alone doing this.
Yeah.
I know for me finding Liliana going, oh, oh, you too. How okay, I'm not alone in this. We're not here to give medical advice. We're not going to diagnose you
No,
with
no.
dynamic disability. But we are here to say, like, you do not have to do this by yourself.
Yeah.
You're not the only one struggling with this new identity and how to be both.
Mhm.
And yeah, I want to know like where else can we go and talk about this?
Yeah.
How else can we get this information to be just as accessible as, child-centered foundational pieces of play therapy?
Yeah.
Because it's just as important.
Mhm. And that you can still do. I love this conversation too, right? Like most clients, it's Robert Grant who says most clients who come for therapy do not come because of this. They come because of behaviors. The society says, no, this is not okay. Right. So please learn about dynamic disability. Usually people do not come because they say, like, I have dynamic disability. They come because of other things, but do not minimize that that is the umbrella that will be the driver of this in regards to me attending, right? Which as a clinician, it will have another whole conversation of how do we manage no shows? How do we manage late cancellations? That's a whole conversation that in the future we'll talk about it too. In the meantime, please be gentle with yourself. Please be curious and be gentle with us.
Yes.
There's a
Yeah,
lot of us out there.
there are more than most people would think.
Yeah. So anything else before we say goodbye, Maria, that you want to add?
No, I love just ending with like the stay curious,
Yeah.
right? It's the Ted Lasso, right? Stay curious, not judgmental.
Mhm.
of that show, right? But like, if we could extend that just in every interaction that we have with people and assume that people are doing the best with what they have at the time that you're in front of them,
Yeah.
that grace goes a long way.
I love that you said that, and I'm going to end up with humor. So if you're familiar with Gabriel Iglesias, he's a comedian. He used to say, I love chocolate cake. So everyone, every time they went to his shows, will take him chocolate cake. So I'm going to invite you, all of you who are listening, if you see Maria and I, and if you want to bring the Ted Lasso biscuits, just do it with almond flour, please, or gluten-free, and we will eat them. So if you see us and if you want to bring this out, as Gabriel Iglesias will do it, we will take them from you.
Yes, gluten-free biscuits with the boss. Yes.
So until next time, thank you for listening. As always, please share this podcast. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us.
Talk again soon. Bye.
Bye.